I had just come into a situation where I was still at high school age, but had to drop out and work full-time at a pizza spot across the street from the high school I had attended to pay bills and rent and things. When I began working there, I realized a girl I had attended school with, she was a senior when I was a freshman, was my manager. Her name was Meredith, and she seemed slightly off-kilter, but I was at the time the sort of person to ignore personality flaws, mental instability in my co-workers. Partly because I enjoyed my job and partly because I wanted to be friends with everyone. Don't ask me why. I can't for the life of me explain it now. Anyway, this girl, Meredith, was the manager during the day and scheduled me to work under her quite frequently. We enjoyed working together. We would crack jokes, take smoke breaks together, etc. I could sort of tell when I first started working there. She was a little crazy, but I didn't think too much of it because she didn't have a problem with me. Meredith had a boyfriend named Steve. He would frequent the pizza shop to visit her and get free shit. He looked sort of like Steve Buscemi if he were 19 and a stoner, who wore these dumb fucking mushrooming glass necklaces. Sorry to anyone who wore those. He was pretty weird. He didn't seem to shower and he was a major mouth breather. I personally did not enjoy Steve's presence in the pizza shop. He creeped me out and seemed to stare at me blatantly when he would come in during my shift. One day, I come to work and guess who's in the kitchen, washing dishes? Our old buddy Steve. Meredith apparently had to spend even more time with Steve. His countless hours here during our shifts just weren't enough. I was slightly perturbed by this, but kept to myself the rest of my shift, and a while later requested that I be moved to the night shift, so that I didn't have to endure near constant PDA or intense fighting. This is when my trouble began. Once I switched to the night shift, Meredith seemed to have completely shifted her attitude towards me. I chalked it up to her being upset because we had such great times during our shifts. We were pals. I would call her to chill, and she would be incredibly rude and passive-aggressive. So I just stopped initiating any kind of contact. So, some backstory. My dad had a very tumultuous life. He was schizophrenic and bipolar, and tried his hardest to be a good dude. He had won a lawsuit against a company he worked for being injured on the job, and it sort of rescued me from a shitty situation I had gotten myself into. We were living together in a 2-story townhome about 5 blocks from the place I was working. He was in and out of the house, hardly ever there. We had a Cadillac CTS that he purchased from a police auction with his lawsuit money. He was proud as fuck of that thing. I was too. I was unlicensed, but he let me drive anyway, so I would drive it the super far 5 blocks to and from work. Silly, I know. One night after work, I am hanging out with some friends and I got a really strange call. It was an unknown number, and as mentioned previously, I was extremely naive about people, so obviously I answer. All I can hear after I say hello is some creepy-ass heavy breathing. I'm sort of freaked out, so I say hello again, but I'm met with more heavy breathing. I hang up and tell my group of friends, and they tell me someone is probably just pranking me. A few hours go by, and in the meantime I get 2 more of these calls. Nothing but breathing. I'm beginning to get a little scared, but my friends believe I'm just being pranked and tell me to just ignore the calls. I heed their advice and ignore the calls, all while being very confused and starting to become slightly afraid. We eat a shitload of munchies and pass out. The next day rolls around and everything seems well and fine. And, well, until about 10 p.m. The private number is calling me again. I think to myself, I'll just pick up and tell them to stop, and I'm sure they will. I pick up and laugh. Please stop. Who is this? There's silence for a few seconds, and then a deep guttural voice saying, I will fucking kill you, bitch. Click. I feel my face go white and my palms get clammy. This isn't someone who is just fucking with me because they think it's funny. This appears to be someone who genuinely does not like me. Someone who may want to do me harm. I call a friend and ask her to come over because I'm sort of afraid to be alone at this point. And who the hell knows where my dad is right now. I began to get a little paranoid at this point. I would make sure the first floor windows and doors were locked while I was there by myself. I started putting my phone on mute so I wouldn't know when whoever this was would be calling me. I stopped answering calls. They slowed, and I was lulled into a false sense of security. A week later, I went to a kickback with my girls. I didn't take the car as I usually had because I was dealing with a lot of bullshit and wanted to get completely obliterated drunk. A friend came and picked me up, and I thought nothing of the crazy person who wanted to kill me, bitch. My dad had come home that day and would be there to watch and make sure no one tried to mess with the house or anything. I thought. I'm at least 4 drinks in when I get a call, this time from my dad. He's screaming as loud as he possibly can to get the fuck home, now. I tell my friend that we have to bounce. She's totally cool with taking me back to the house. We arrive in probably about 10 minutes. Because we generally only hung out in the southern area of our town. We pull up and my dad is fucking furious. I can tell because when he would get extremely angry or into a manic state, he would pace back and forth, and he was doing this across the parking lot, yelling at no one. I first thought that he had gone into one of his episodes, so I try my best to be prepared for that. I walk up, he yelps, "Look at the car," and points. I look at the windshield of our precious baby, and on it, in fucking spray paint nonetheless, is written, "A, I know where you live, little slut," and a drawing of a dick. Yes, I shit you not. A dick. I'm as confused as hell now, y'all. I have no clue who would want to fuck with me so bad. I was not the type to do anything really shitty to anyone. I wanted to be everyone's friend. I racked my brain trying to determine how I had slighted anyone I had recently come into contact with, and came up with nothing. Another week goes by. I haven't gotten any calls from private numbers. No more of my personal property gets damaged. I legitimately think it's over. I go to another party for my friend's birthday. This party is on a large piece of land in the middle of goddamned nowhere. There were probably about 150 people there, tons of cars, lots of commotion. We had to park in a scary driveway area that was about a quarter of a mile from the house and walk the rest of the way because there was nowhere closer. We go in, chill for a bit, and decide to go back out to the car to grab some blunts we had left behind. Laurie and I are walking to the car when we realize one of the windows has been broken. We are sufficiently creeped out, so we walk very slowly up to it. There is no one around, and we had only been in for about an hour at this point. We go through the car to assess the damage and see what's been stolen. Some bud, a bottle we were drinking out of that was probably still very full. Her purse was gone. My purse was gone. We got super pissed. We did something dumb and started walking into the woods nearest us to try and recover some of the things we'd lost. We're using our cell phone flashlights, wandering through these woods when I get a call. I'm pretty focused on finding my shit, so I ignore it. I find my purse, completely empty. We find Laurie's wallet, completely empty. I get another call. I ignore it. I'm too pissed because I just lost so much. By the time we'd walked back up to the party, this private caller had rung me at least 12 times. That's 12 times within a 5-minute period. Finally, when we get back up to the house, they call me again and I scream into it. "Who the fuck is this? What do you want?" I scream just as I answer, and don't really take the time to listen to what's happening. And when I do, it's sort of terrifying. Whoever this is has been calling me and screaming as loud as they possibly can, probably throughout hanging up and calling again. All of this is unintelligible. When I stop screaming, "Who is this?" I can hear a literal banshee communicating with me on the other end. Up until this point, I couldn't determine who this was, but now I was certain. This was my old manager, Meredith. I hung up and threw my phone. I threw that bitch as hard as I possibly could. This was a pretty bad idea, as I was in sort of a bad situation at the time. In the middle of nowhere, wooded area, a sea of people. Car broken into. Broke my phone. I started crying and told Laurie what was going on. She agreed that we needed to get the fuck out of there as soon as possible. I was hesitant to go into work the next day, but I did anyway, because I needed a new phone and just cash in general. I walk in with my head down, hoping none of my co-workers are aware of the extremely odd situation I'd been thrown into. Weird enough, Steve was working. I distanced myself from him the whole night, because I was scared that he too hated me. I had no idea why he was working this shift. Was it only to taunt me and intimidate me out of my own workplace? I began to realize that he too seemed to want to keep distance from me. Before the end of my shift, my night manager, he was also the GM, Joe, asked if he could talk to me outside. I was confident of my position there, I didn't have issues with anyone else, and I had no idea why only one staff member had an issue with me. We stepped outside and I braced myself for bad news. I figured since Meredith was a manager and didn't like me, I'd be fired if she suggested it, even if I had no idea what I'd done. Joe informed me that Meredith came into the shop the previous night and was hysterical. She was looking for me. She was screaming and seemed to be on drugs. His words, not mine. She apparently had been flipping out because she thought I'd been sleeping with stoner Steve Buscemi behind her back. Joe asked if any of this was true. I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my entire life. I explained to him that I wanted to switch to the night shift in the first place, so that I didn't have to be around Steve. He creeped me out. Their relationship was an emotional roller coaster that I did not want to be around. He agreed. He said she would no longer be working at Arnold Schwarzenegger as a Barbarian's pizza shop. She was fired promptly the next day, and Steve quit a few days later. I've never heard from them again. Two. This is an encounter that happened to me almost 8 years ago. I had just started uni, and my older brother, Jack, was almost finished with his radiologist certification. Before I get into the encounter, I must lay some background information. As I stated before, Jack was almost finished with his radiology classes, and being the class was small, it happened to become quite a close-knit group of friends. Since graduation was nearing, one of Jack's classmates, Mary, decided to host a party at her house for the class, and Jack, figuring he would need a designated driver for the night, and also trying to hook me up with another classmate of his, invited me along. We get to the party and everything is alright at the start, until Mary's boyfriend showed up at the party. Her boyfriend, Mick, was a pretty sturdy-looking Vietnamese guy who had perma-resting bitch face and just gave off an air of fuck off. He kept eyeballing my brother the whole night, even more so after rounds of shots went around the party. I got soda since I was underage and my brother's designated driver. Eventually I noticed him and my brother talking, and whatever they were talking about, which I would find out later in the car, it was becoming ugly. Apparently, Mick didn't like my brother because Mary often studied with him. He ignored the fact that most of the time there would be 2 or 3 others studying with them, and that they never had any interaction apart from study groups. And with liquid courage in him, he threatened my brother, and also me. My brother, who grew up with not the nicest sorts, gangs, drugs, violence, etc., quickly let his temper flare up, especially when Mick told him, "It would be a shame if your brother, I'm in throwaway 222, happened not to make it to his 8:30 algebra class after getting out of his silver truck." Not knowing at that moment why they were about to start physically fighting, I had managed to get my brother to his car, apologized to Mary if we were in any trouble, and began to drive my brother home. I was trying to calm my brother down, but he dropped this bombshell on me. He threatened you to get at me. He knows where you go to class first. You see anything you tell me, he's fucking with the wrong family. To be honest, I didn't know how to take it at first. It freaked me out, but at the same time, I thought maybe my brother might have been a little too sauced. I know my city has an issue with Vietnamese gangs. My brother is friends with former gang members. And to be honest, they can be scarier than the Hispanic gangs that run around. But I decided to brush it off, thinking both guys had one too many shots and were just flexing at each other. Flash forward a couple weeks later. I'm dating this girl from my uni, and we ended up studying at her apartment a lot, which was close to the school. After we got finished with homework, to be honest, we didn't study much, I would drive home, often at 1 or 2 a.m. This night I was driving home. I was waiting at a light, waiting to make a turn to get onto a highway ramp, when a car on the opposite side of the intersection, a green Toyota sedan, decides to blow through the light. Typical inner-city driver, I thought to myself, when just as the car passes by, I thought I heard it backfire twice. Thinking nothing of it, the light turns green, and I make my way to get onto the ramp. And behind me, I hear the car screeching through a U-turn, and soon enough the car is right on my ass. The ramp is a one-lane ramp before it merges with the main highway, so I keep to the right to allow them to pass by, but they're just on my ass. I decide to speed up, hoping that he'd back off, but he is just relentless. I try brake checking, speeding, changing lanes and trying to shake them. But whoever is driving this car is just sticking to me like glue. Somehow during all this, my phone has flung itself to the passenger side of the car, out of reach, and I don't want to try to get it because I'm driving at about 85 to 90 miles per hour, trying to shake this guy. Eventually, I get to a part of town I know really well, with some dark neighborhood streets. So I make a last-second exit off the freeway, nearly sideswiping a car, and I barrel through a right turn. Thank my lucky stars the light was green, and I pull into this neighborhood. Cut my lights, and I drive until I find a dark, dead-end street where I park and duck down. I manage to find my phone, and just as luck would have it, it's dead. So I just lay low, freaking out, when I saw approaching headlights. I sat there for over an hour until I finally managed to convince myself if they knew where I was, they'd have found me by now. I take side streets home, and when I get there, I somehow manage to get my jelly legs out of the truck. When I close the door, I noticed on the trip under the door, there are 2 small 1/4-inch holes. And I had that heart-sink, body freeze feeling. And I remembered what my brother had told me on that drive home a couple of weeks ago. My brother was still awake when I got in the house, and I took him aside. I asked him if anyone was trying to fuck with him by getting to me, and told him what happened. Immediately, he got stone-faced and told me very flatly, "I'll handle it." And that was the end of the conversation. He told me to go to bed and everything would be okay. A couple nights later, at an ungodly hour of the night, I think maybe 3 or 4 a.m., I heard a car screeching through the street and come to a stop at my house. My brother had come home, very drunk, and my dad was immediately furious, demanding to know what the fuck he was thinking, etc. And I remember my brother telling my parents there was a fight, and my brother's ex-gang friends took some guy in his car to teach him a lesson. But they told my brother to get the fuck home. After a shouting bout, everyone decided to go to bed, while I was still in my room pretending to be asleep. I was never followed again, but I was always pretty paranoid when leaving my girlfriend's house. A few months later, I decided to ask my brother what happened with Mick, and my brother told me they had found out the club where he liked to hang out, and he and his friends decided to go drinking there, hoping he would show up. Well, that night he did. So my brother and his buddies, being as drunk as they were, decided they were going to confront this guy. Mick was by himself, so my brother and co managed to get Mick out of the club and take him away in his own car. They told my brother they'd handle it and told him to go home. He didn't need to be there. They beat Mick up pretty badly, and bashed his car really bad as well. They found out Mick had his friend follow me around at school to know my schedule, etc. And that they had planned to beat the shit out of me to fuck with my brother that night I was followed. Mick apparently had this delusion that Jack was trying to steal his girl from him, and was extra psycho. Nonetheless, after that night my brother never heard from Mick again. And he also found out Mary and Mick had broken up a few days after that party, probably fueling Mick's desire to get to my brother. Probably the scariest moment of my life. And knowing that they had planned to do me grievous harm, I shudder to think what could have happened if I wasn't able to lose them in that chase. 3. Yesterday morning I was unfortunate enough to suffer a power cut, and spending my day in total darkness isn't something I enjoy. I ended up wandering around town throughout the day to kill some time. After spending a few hours at my old university, I decided I should get a hotel for me and my dog, as the power outage was expected to last a few days. And we live in the south where no AC can be a big issue. I finally managed to find somewhere nearby that will book me and my pup without costing us a few arms and legs. And that's when everything started to go downhill. I would need to get a cab from my old school back home, and then to the hotel. Everything is within 3 miles of each other, and I figured it would be simple. I wasn't aware that there was a late graduation ceremony going on, so every time I tried to call a cab, they wouldn't show up or someone else would take them. When the sun was starting to set, I found someone who was a previous classmate of mine. They gave me a ride home and I packed up my stuff. I called another cab, and lo and behold, it didn't feel like coming. And since Uber wasn't working, I decided I would take my bag, my pup, and myself, and walk my happy butt the mile or so to the hotel, so that she can have a good rest. I started walking, and about a quarter of the way there I hear someone behind me. Enter my nightmare. A 6-foot-something brick house of a person with a grisly look about them. They looked me up and down and said, "Hey there, girl, where are you going?" Now let it be known, I am new to this area. I am from the middle of nowhere, and this is horrifying to me. I decided my options were to be incredibly polite or to run screaming, so I fell back on politeness. After rejecting him taking my bags multiple times, he stated he was walking to the place right next to my hotel. So I decided I would try to humanize myself as much as possible and keep a dialogue going between us. He asked me questions about my family, friends, why I was here. I made a bit of a story that I had family and I was here for graduation, so that it seemed like I had people who would know I was expected. Shortly after this, he reaches into his pocket and says, "You need this." And he hands me a small knife. Not knowing what to say, I thank him a few times. Moments later, he is talking to himself before looking at me and inviting me to live with his niece and her boyfriend. Internally, I am screaming. I know I could do nothing. This guy has at least 1.5 feet on me, and I am exhausted. We continue walking, and he tells me he gets a good vibe from me, and he could see us in a relationship and with a family. He keeps muttering to himself about tons of stuff, people, girls. It was very hard to make out. He looks at me and says, "I had an epiphany." I realize he meant an epiphany, but that was how it was said. And I said, "Oh?" He just smiled and did a head shake and kind of chuckled to himself, muttering, "Good night, good night." I figure it's alright, we're about halfway there, and I'm holding a conversation, listening to how he went to prison for 2 years over a gun, and how Snoop Dogg dedicated a song to him. We get to a very dark part of the walk, and he looks at someone walking towards us and pushes me to the side of the sidewalk, but is away from the street and says, "You walk here now. It's your mine now, little girlie." Suddenly, people walking to the cars from graduation walk past us. I feel safer, and I know that I am home free. As we approach the hotel parking lot, he asks if he can join me. I make up some excuse about how it's only booked for one person and it's not in my values. He follows me into the lobby. He follows me to the front desk. I am told I can't stay because I am 20, not 21, and they had a recent policy change. My heart sinks. He is attached to my side and I can't tell anybody I am terrified. I see a worker at another desk and say I am going to the bathroom. I whisper to her, "Please, can I talk to you somewhere? I'm in a small emergency." She escorts me away and I explain that he's been following me. She has me sit down, and he is trying to talk another person into using their ID for what he is now calling our room. A woman employee walks over and says, "Do you know this girl?" And he replies, baffled, "Yeah, this is my girl. We know each other for years." She looks at him and asks my name. "She my girl. She my girl," he says. She tells him if he doesn't leave the lobby, the police will be called. It ends up that she is the bartender. She sits me down and ended up helping me get my room, and I fully intend to thank her and the other woman properly. After an hour sitting in the bar and her negotiating my stay, she looks at me and says, "If you wouldn't have been able to stay, I would have paid for you or taken you home because he's still out there. He has still been outside on and off since this morning, so good vibe knife, man." although you are determined to try. Let's not meet again, please.